there's a couple things here that I want to make sure you get, like you understand, not really to memorize, but just understand this. So if you start building your rental portfolio and you're okay managing, you want to learn how to manage, that you want to jump careers, you want to build your portfolio, and this is really the direction you want to go. You want to learn how to be a good property manager, manage all your stuff, maybe manage other people's stuff. But so when you're building, you go, well, I could scratch that line because I don't need it, right? That doesn't need to be an expense for you. So you build the portfolio. Let's say you get up to 40 properties and the whole thing is performing as planned based on you managing it. And then you go, I hate this. And you don't want to do it anymore. And now you need to hire somebody. Now you've got 10% of your income that's going out towards management. Does your portfolio perform the same way anymore? So my recommendation is that even if you want to manage it now, that you leave room in there for the future so you're not locking yourself into managing these things for the rest of your days. Here's a dangerous number. And if you read somewhere, you read a post, you read a book, an article, and it says, use 5% or whatever percent for your maintenance. Just ignore it. Really, banks will have a standard. Banks will say, we're going to use 5%. Okay. But what does that mean for your property? Is that really what you need? Maybe. Maybe it's more, maybe it's less. My point is that you should find out what maintenance is going to cost for your property. And if it comes out to 5, cool. If it doesn't, you know the right amount to budget. So, if you have a house that was built last year versus a house that was built in 1900, and the 1900 house has been a rental house for the past 40 years, which one do you think is going to have more maintenance? I mean, that's logic, right? So you can't apply that factor and have it work for everything. Salaries and benefits. So this is really cool here. And I'll tell you why. This number here, this 10% management, you can pay a property manager, and what do they do, right? They're responsible for your property. So if the city needs to contact somebody because something's going wrong, and you've registered your property with the city's going to contact the landlord, not you. If the tenant has a problem with maintenance, they contact the landlord, not you. The tenant pays the rent to the landlord, not you, or the property manager, not you. So you're kind of out of the mix, right? But they're collecting money and they're responding to issues. And could you hire somebody at some point to do that stuff for you? Pretty easily, really. Once you know what to do, once you got it, like you know how to handle things, you know time frames, you know what letter to send out if they're not paying their rent or if they're up all night making noise. Like once you get it, then you can show somebody else how to do it and save yourself a bunch of money. Utilities. You might think, the tenant pays the utilities. Well, depends on where you are. So the bill might come to you and you have to bill the tenant back. In the city, the water bill is going to come to the owner and you got to bill the tenants, and the other stuff can go directly to the tenant. So common electric. So the tenants, like if you have a 3-unit building, the foyer area and the basement area are going to be on the house electric, and their units are going to be just their use. So there are some utility costs. And then, of course, property taxes. And this number here for insurance is like for a $50,000 row home, it's good to go. It's really not too expensive. Whoop. All right, so that's the expenses. Then the tricky part, the reserves. And this is where people just fall off somehow. And maybe it's the same mentality of people who don't want to have any savings. You know, like they're just like living on the edge. Okay, well, let's see what happens with this. So remember, when the unit goes vacant, you don't have income, right? But you still have bills. So where's the money to pay the bills? Hopefully, you've been putting money into an account every month for reserves for different things, and you pay those bills at that time out of that account. Here's a calculation. Every 30 months before a 2-month vacancy. So the average tenant staying 2.5 years. I love to ask the question to property managers and landlords, what's your average? What's your average? What's your average? 2.5 years just seems to be what's average. So if you know that every 30 months you're going to have a 2-month vacancy, budget for it. Now, I will say that if you have 1-bedroom apartments, could be different. I had a 20-unit building, and it was, some people stayed for a long time, but other people were just like in and out in a year. You know, it's like they needed a place, like they got a job and they needed a place for a while. So 1-bedrooms are a little different. 3s, then you're at these kind of numbers. So as a blend, 2.5 years. So you take 6.25% is the same as this 30 months before a 2-month vacancy. So they move out. You go in, you get your list of work. You get whoever's going to do the work scheduled. They do the work. And let's say that takes 3 weeks, right? Then you place an ad. And you got people calling, and then you start showing. Are you going to fill it within that week? Like to get it done in 1 month? So you got 3 weeks to repair. Are you going to get a tenant in there in that week? Maybe. But you have to find a tenant who's like, I need somewhere to go. Like now. Is that going to happen? Probably not. And if you do find somebody in that time period, they're probably not looking for next week. They're probably looking for the first of the next month. So how can you shorten that time? Because this seriously is time is money stuff. I mean, if your rent's $900, it's $900 advantage if you can get somebody in there faster, right? So one way to shorten that time is, if your tenant says, I'm moving out March 1st, see what you can do before March 1st. See if you could go in and look at the place. Like, what am I going to need to do? Is this place showable? Maybe the tenant will be okay with you showing the apartment now. And a lot of times they are, and I mean, that's a tremendous advantage. So what's your thought on that? So your initial reaction, I have tenants and my tenant says they're moving out and I want to start showing their unit while they're living there. Does anybody have a gut reaction to that?
I think it depends on the tenant. Like, I mean, if they keep the place nice, why not?
offer an incentive
Offer them an incentive? Why?
because it's going to help you in the long run.
What's it doing to
For
them?
them,
Like, what's it doing to them?
It's an inconvenience for them. They don't have to do that.
absolutely.
And you want the place to be showable, so you want it cleaned. So you can say, every showing I'm going to give you $20, $10, $15, whatever. That goes a long way. So, and if they're there, and you have a good relationship with them, and you're putting $20 in their hand every time, they'll probably even say good things about you. All right. So, reserve for vacancy. Reserve for the fill fee. So, 10% management doesn't include if it's vacant and now they need to advertise, show, and sign a lease. That's extra. And that's usually 1 month's rent. So, and even if you're doing it yourself and you're like, ugh, I don't have time to do this advertising and showing. I need to get somebody to do that for me. 1 month's rent. So, you going to budget for it or not? I guess, so that's it. You put that in there. Then there's turnover maintenance. So this is saying every year $1,560. So 30 months, that's a little less than 3 times that. So maybe that's like $4,000. I don't really know what it comes out to. So in 30 months, you save up $4,000 for the turnover. Does that seem like a reasonable amount, do you think, for paint, carpet, maybe a new stove? Yeah, like what you should feel like if your rental works on paper like this, you should feel like, like this is going to work. Like this is a good situation. And I don't know what it is. I think it's just excitement, but people want a deal more than they want a good deal. And they force themselves, and they're like, I could stretch this, and I could do that, and that doesn't matter. It's trouble. So you've got that. That's turnover maintenance. But then there's this one for capital expenditures. That's your roof, that's your siding, that's your windows, that's your driveway, sidewalks, tree removal, like the big stuff. The stuff that you normally, like if you paint, that's it. On your taxes, you just write that off immediately. You put in a new heating system, that gets depreciated over time. That's usually where you draw the line between regular repair, reserves, and capital expenditures. Is anybody here like a financial whiz and you're familiar with the financials on property? All right. So depending on who you are, like your position in a deal, you would put that where it is now and count it as an expense so that your net income reflects this number. Doesn't that make sense? But if you're selling a commercial whatever, that's not there. They show the performance without that. And from their argument, they say that, well, you don't report it on your taxes that way. Okay. But what does it do? It makes the cap rate, it makes the performance rates look better. And then their argument could be, well, if we put a new heating system in, that affects the value of the property. Maybe. But if you're on the buying end, you're like, I want to know that number. And I want to see how it works with that number plugged in. So there isn't really a right place to put it, but I put it there.
So you're just using these as figuring when you're going to buy the property. You're not actually banking $1,247 you put in the bank and saving it for future, or are you? You are, so this is built over time, or you
Yes.
want to have that as in your pocket up front?
Yep. So let's say you're buying it, and day one, you know that. Let's say on day one you buy the property, and you know that in 3 years you're going to need a roof. Your budget for your capital expenditure reserves is going to be high for 3 years, so that you can meet that, and then it's going to drop down. But if you don't put the money somewhere, it's not really in a reserve ready to be used.
And is that money being generated from your rent, or where's that money coming
Yes.
from?
So this is offsetting the income. So we've got 15.6 as the income, and then 1,247 of it is going into reserve for capital expenditures. 1560 is going for maintenance. So you end up with a pretty beefy reserve account. You should.
Do you put it in anything like a short-term CD or anything like that? Or do you just,
Sure. Like you can gauge, like you can look at it and do whatever you want with it. It's your money. You can go on vacation if you want.
Right.
You know, but certainly invest it. Sure.
right.
And I mean, let's say you've got a lot of property, and your reserve account is a couple $100,000. You should be lending that out. You should be investing in notes. You know. So then you've got this reserves subtotal, and then your annual operating expense total. So your annual operating expenses is the sum of your expenses that we went through on the last one, and then the reserve for vacancy, reserve for fill fee, reserve for maintenance, turnover maintenance, and the reserve for capital expenditures. So you've got all that totaled up. Now, here I'm showing 8,300 as your expenses that offset this 15.6. I want to tell you about this other rule, the 50% rule. Again, this is just something to say, oh, this is how I'm doing against that. But it really doesn't mean anything, okay? If you're happy with the bottom line, cool. But the 50% rule says that 50% of your income should be what your expenses are. If you hit a 50% rule and a 2% rule, you're doing great. You've got a good performing rental property.